The Archdiocese of Chicago is a vibrant and diverse faith community. We celebrate our faith through worship, evangelization, and reaching out to the needy. Welcome to Catholic Chicago.
Good morning and welcome to the Voice of Charity. I'm Katie Bredemann and we thank you for joining us today. Recently, Sally Blount, President and CEO of Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of Chicago, welcomed Kerry Robinson to the Windy City. Kerry is the new President and CEO of Catholic Charities USA, which is based in Alexandria, Virginia. While she was in town, Kerry Robinson had a fascinating conversation with Betsy Bohlen, who is Chief Operating Officer for the Archdiocese of Chicago. This discussion was held during a luncheon at Old St. Patrick's Parish, and it was moderated by Sally Blount. The topic discussed was Realizing Change, Women's Emerging Leadership Roles in the Modern Church. It was an engaging discussion, and we wanted to share some of it with you today.
So I want to begin to get into the preparing and leading, and I think there are a couple parts of it I think folks would enjoy hearing about. One is sort of how do you, as you look back, because we see God's hands in hindsight, right? And as you look back, how do you get a sense for how he's prepared and formed you for the roles that you're in? And I do want to begin to get to the questions that are in the back of everyone's minds of, so how does it get sticky at times with the governance structure, right? And how do you work within the constraints of the governance structure? So I want to be more conversational about that and not just sort of Q&A. So I don't know which one wants to talk first about the forming, and then we'll get to the governance as you talk about your forming.
Forming.
So just how when you retrospect in hindsight as you're in these roles, how do you see how God has prepared you for these roles? Because you're saying it's this invitation, but he's been preparing you for the invitation.
Without question. When I advise young adults who see all of these opportunities before them and they're asking, what should I do? I have so many interests and desires. Some of the best advice that you can give is first of all, you're too young to make a career-altering mistake. But it only has to make sense looking backwards. And when I look back on my life and I see all of the things that I initially resisted and then accepted and stepped up to the plate and led, I see how everything has prepared me for this moment right now. And that is, I think, the definition of vocation.
Could you give a couple specific examples, like when I think about your work at Yale, and as you became a fundraiser in that role, right? I don't know if there are specific, because there's some beautiful things in your book about these interactions that you had with different donors and things. I don't know if there's a particular interaction that comes to mind at Yale or in the leadership roundtable of when you said, okay, God, I'm really supposed to be here right now in this moment.
I was quite young when I was helping Father Bob Bohlen, the Catholic chaplain at Yale, expand Catholic life on Yale's campus. And I had never had any experience raising money. I knew something about the other side of the coin, what donors are looking for in terms of making a major philanthropic investment, but I really had never even been trusted to run the bake sale at our child's daycare. So the idea of being asked to serve as the director of development without any of this background and all these terrible ideas about fundraising was terrifying and loathsome to me. Father Bob had called me and he said, your name came to me in prayer. I want to invite you to do this. He holds all the cards when he says your name, in prayer. And I didn't know how to let him down, but then I remembered, this is 26 years ago, I was 7 months pregnant with my second child. I told him this happy news, long silence on the phone, and then he says, I'm so happy for you and your husband. This is great news. You can work from home. I resisted it. He said, just pray about it for 5 days. Whatever your answer in prayer will be, of course, I'll accept and honor. And I thought, excellent. 5 days of praying and my no will be so eloquent. And of course, those of you who take prayer seriously, you know you are the one changed in prayer so often. And that's what happened. So I blindly accepted it, but fortified by prayer. And the formative piece of it was modeling at such a young age lay clergy collaboration. We were partners and equal. I didn't report to him. He did not report to me. Together, we reported to our board. And modeling that, especially male, female, was so essential to my future work on behalf of the church. And there was an integrity to it. So that was definitely a major formative moment.
That's really beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Betsy, you've been through a lot of ups and downs. When have you had this deep certainty that if I hadn't been at McKinsey, I couldn't be doing this now? Like, when is that just aligned? Like, oh, now I understand.
So I would say all the way through. I think being at McKinsey, which is a consulting firm, all of my work was on helping to think about organizations at a large scale and how do you have impact and govern and manage a large organization. And I would say from the very beginning, the church as a large institution and as a Church of Jesus Christ will never make decisions the same way a secular institution will. But it still has many of the same challenges and difficulties that another large institution would have. And so I think historically, by saying we're different, we actually didn't recognize the challenges that come from being a large organization that are similar. And so I would say from the very beginning that having worked my whole sort of adult life in an organization that helps large companies and large institutions was absolutely necessary to be able to do the work now.
I think often, Betsy, you were one of the first women on the Finance Council, right, when you were at McKinsey?
Boy, I'm trying to remember. That was about right, I think.
Because I think what's also important that's got modeled very early on, right, is you have a woman truly explaining finances to a lot of men and watching, and your ability to do that. One of the things you and I discussed once is what made you so comfortable sort of standing on your own 2 feet in a room where you're the only woman and there are all these men. And would you be, like, because you talked some about, like, when you were younger as a child and things and in the playground and things. I don't know if you're willing to tell any of those.
I don't know if you remember more than I do.
But because I've often seen her in a room and she holds her own, even with the cardinal, right, Jim? She holds her own, right? And so, like, how did that get shaped in you?
So it might just be personality. I would say as someone who grew up by chance in a neighborhood that was predominantly boys, whose at least then, whose career, like Notre Dame at the time was 30% women. HBS at the time was 30% women. McKinsey at the time was 30% women, or less in any of those cases. I think that might have been something that helped with just being used to operating in male-dominated environments. I actually think people ask about that. I do spend my time often with many men. Right? I'll be at an Episcopal council with the cardinal and the bishops where I'm the only woman. There's times I'm presenting at a priest day where there's 600 people in the room and I'm the only woman. The advantage is there's no line for the bathroom on those days. My take is they are more open to women in leadership than they get credit for in total. And that's having worked with both Cardinal George and Cardinal Cupich, two very different people. I find them both very open to working with women.
So the governance is interesting in the Catholic Church. And, I've had my conversations with both of you on this, on all the all the silos and all the fragmentation. And I guess I would love it if you'd be willing to share times when you felt particularly challenged by the governance, especially entering into it as a non-religious person, as a lay person, and a time when you felt it was an advantage because you had a fresh perspective and you were allowed to almost say something that somebody else couldn't.
Well, I can say that genuinely, I have only ever benefited from being a woman in the Catholic Church. But I have also seen how many women have been thwarted in their genuine desire to serve with all of their gifts and abilities in leadership in the church. And that anguishes my heart. I also look at how every institution in the world initially resists including women along with men in the top leadership. only to relent and realize how that institution benefits from the presence of women with men in leadership. So while I have personally felt called and supported and encouraged and given these opportunities to exercise my own prophetic voice, I think that the anguish many women feel all across the globe with respect to their role in the church is real, and it is something for us to attend to. The moral life ought to make sense. And the church benefits from the presence of women. The women in this room. Imagine the church without you. Imagine the church without your skill, ability, talents, desires, passions. We would all be impoverished.
I've often thought there's a generational moment that created an opening, because we're all roughly the same generation. It's almost there's been a generational opening that has created a willingness to bring in the gifts, right, of women. And I do think that women who were involved before our generation faced a much harder time being taken, having their gifts recognized. Yeah. It does feel partly generational to me. Yeah. How about you? Like, as you think about it, have there times when the governance, when you're kind of going, I wish it were kind of a little different, or could we work it differently?
Maybe every day, I don't know. So I think, to me, the angle I would take on it is, are we bringing the right skills at the right time for the right moment, for the right complexity? And that it's not, to me, it's not often is it a man versus a woman. It's often, are we sure we're bringing in the right skill relative to the challenges we're facing? And if we narrow the governance among a certain group who may not have actually had the experience that's needed for certain things, that's where things can not only not benefit the church, but harm the church. And so I think the challenge we're always having is, how do we just make sure we're bringing the right skill at the right time for the right place, and who needs to be in the conversation and participating. It isn't always our instinct for whatever reason. I think there's just concerns about like who governs, or maybe there's just an underestimation of complexity that we actually face. One thing that the Cardinal Supich has just been very strong about and gifted in is bringing the best talent he can to the problems at hand. I think we've been able to accomplish an enormous amount because he's just opened the door to talent as he sees it. We have some of the best talent in the Archdiocese of Chicago who could have done anything else, who've chosen to come. Many who are here at the Archdiocese of Chicago and at Catholic Charities. And I think you see the result of that, right? I think we've accomplished an enormous amount altogether these years because I think he's been heavily focused on making sure we bring the right talent.
Well, and I think he's been extraordinary in the modern church. I mean, because I know he's been a big sponsor for you, and I don't know if there is another large archdiocese that has women in two key roles. So I do think he's been particularly good at promoting women. One of the things you and I talked about, and you and I have talked about a little bit, is one of the things you learn out in corporate and people are really good at is when you're developing leaders in the for-profit sector, people are very conscious of scaling up experience. First you manage one or two people, then you manage a team, then you manage two teams, and maybe four teams, and then maybe you manage a $15 million P&L. And one of the things you see in the boardroom and on talent development, and even like, Jim, I think of you and private equity and investing in companies, you get people ready for increasingly large scale. And I know one of the things we see in the church is that organization building skill. There's so few men in the ministry right now, and they're being called to jump into roles before they've had that scaling up time, right? And so that notion, because Betsy, sometimes I feel like part of what you're teaching people, and Kerry, what you were doing at the Leadership Roundtable, and I wonder if you both comment on is what organization building skills are different than running a pastor, running a parish or managing a team, but how do you manage complexity at 100 million, a billion, right? Or how do you manage a network of 160 different archdioceses, Catholic Charities, and try to create something more out of the whole? So maybe you're talking about introducing those organization building, because you've done it at the Arch, and that's been a big part of your mission at Leadership Roundtable.
Yeah, so Leadership Roundtable, for those who don't know, was created in the wake of the abuse crisis 20 years ago. It never set out to be explicitly about sexual abuse, but that was the catalyst that gave rise to Leadership Roundtable. It is a network of senior level leaders from across all sectors who are Catholic, and we harness their collective managerial, financial, problem-solving, entrepreneurial, leadership expertise to help bishops, cardinals, provincials, and other church leaders solve challenges, especially financial and human resource challenges. At its heart, it is a ministry to recognize this untapped, extraordinary resource, which is intellectual contribution that the laity can make from their own experience, and to strengthen the church, to call it to greater levels of accountability, transparency, and holiness. And so managing all of that 20 years ago, when there was just a level of distrust across the whole system, and bishops were intimidated a bit, or they didn't understand what this high-profile, predominantly lay network really wanted to do vis-a-vis the church. My job was to go bishop by bishop, chancery by chancery, explaining who we are and disarming and disabusing them of any fears that they may have that this is some kind of lay hostile takeover of the church. So it took a lot of perseverance and tenacious commitment to our mission to earn the trust and confidence of bishops. Germane to women, it's not that women are smarter than men, or in the context of the abuse crisis, that parents are more judicious than priests. It's really that diversity matters. Like, who is at the tables of decision-making and deliberation? That matters. It changes the way we analyze problems and come together to solve those challenges. And that was a major offering of Leadership Roundtable.
One of the things I love about the formation of that organization is, if you think about it, is coming out of World War II is really when all this knowledge about how we can manage organizations more effectively got developed and started to be transmitted by business schools. But it isn't just about business, and it isn't about running nonprofits like business. It's the accountability mechanisms and the complexity, as Betsy's talked about. And you were really trying to begin to bring that knowledge into the church, because most priests didn't have MBAs, and why would they think they needed one? And so often, when I think of what business education it's been managing complexity, right? And you were introducing those skills in powerful ways and trying to help bring them in. And I think it's been an amazing legacy, and you're starting a new one.
So I would say that, well, there's many reasons for the misconduct scandal. One reason was we actually didn't understand the scale that we were operating. And so to actually make sure that children are safe, it takes a bunch of what I call pipes. You actually have to make sure you're training people and that they're all getting trained. You actually have to make sure that when there's concern, it gets channeled to the right place, and then there's the right follow-up. You actually have to make sure that your procedures are audited to make sure that they're happening. I could list 10 things that are needed across a diocese to make sure children are safe. And so there was the best of intentions then. I think bishops get a lot of, as if they didn't care. They actually did care. But they were operating at something way above the scale they understood. And so things got lost in the cracks, or they didn't have the follow-up, or they thought so-and-so was following up. And I think that is one of the reasons, I think, for the misconduct scandal, was they just weren't operating at the scale they actually were.
And Betsy, I think you've seen that on other themes, right? And would you be willing to get specific about other kinds of systems where we're creating that piping within the church?
So we use two words that I tried to be visual, because people didn't know what the heck we were talking about originally. So one is we have to put pipes in place. Like, you can't just. May rest in peace. Cardinal George once said, "I'm so frustrated. We're trying to implement something, and then I press the red button and nothing happens. And I said, well, that's because there's no wires under the button. and so we just didn't really have a sense then around how you actually implement something. And so that's one of the themes around how you do it at scale. Some examples, we were able to get 140 schools open in August during COVID because we actually had built the piping before that. We actually had the systems and processes, and we knew how to do it. We knew how to give parishes support to do it. Would be, I think, one example of that. The other image we use a lot is being tethered. That there's a lot of complaints in any diocesan setting that all the people are siloed, as if it's the people are bad people. And I was like, no, that's how every human interacts on their own. They're just looking at their space. You actually need real work to bring people together. I don't know, does that answer it?
Yeah. Well, in fact, you and I spend a lot of time in tethering, and we've begun to spend time on tethering to make sure that we're staying connecting and staying, but in that way, nothing gets lost in the cracks. No, I think those are great examples.
Before you move to the next question, when the history books are written about this period, Cardinal Blaise Cupich will be a hero in it. I first met him in the wake of the abuse crisis and was just mesmerized by how determined he was as a leader among bishops to go the distance with the John Jay study of causes and contexts. He felt that this was important not just to make recompense for the church and to protect children, but to learn as much as we can to rid the world of the scourge of abuse. And I don't think he gets enough credit for how courageous and tenacious and clear he was back then.
That's a great point. We're going to open up for questions. Get yours ready, because my last one is, how has your faith been shaped by this role? I don't know if it's changed your prayer practice. I've got a new saint, but right? We want to know about you, right? Like, how has your faith been shaped by your roles, Kerry?
It's absolutely been strengthened. I mean, my love for the church is not blind love. I have seen the worst of the church. I've seen the ignoble qualities of the church. I can name those qualities. And yet, I am deeply, deeply committed to it. I had a professor at the divinity school, and she subsequently became my spiritual advisor, a fabulous religious sister of mercy. And she, one time, many years ago, probably caught all of the Catholics in her class complaining about this aspect of the church or this aspect, and we were kind of sanctimonious and upset about all kinds of things. And she interrupted us and she said, "You are all here studying at a divinity school. There must be something you like about the church." And then she said the advice I have taken to heart ever since. She said, "The church is invariably going to break your heart. The longer you stay actively engaged in it, your heart will be broken. You will be disappointed. Remember what it is you most love about the Catholic Church, about membership in this faith community. Name what you love. Claim what you love. It will provide ballast when the vicissitudes of life try to knock you off course." We spend so much time thinking about what is imperfect or unjust or frustrating about the church or any number of things. We don't spend enough time taking her advice. My list is long and wide. I love the church's intellectual life, Catholic social teaching as a gift to the entire world, the centrality of the Eucharist, forgiveness and reconciliation, the call to be merciful. I love Catholic Charities, not just in this Archdiocese, but all over the globe. I love that we're called to be Christ-like. I love the community of saints, the fact that our faith insists in eternal life. Love doesn't end in death. So that has been a really, really powerfully helpful piece of advice from my spiritual advisor to remember what you love most about the church and claim it.
That's really beautiful. How about you?
And the question
is, how's your faith been formed or shaped?
So I would say that I probably came defining what I was doing much on my own terms and human terms than I would now. I would say that's been transformed significantly. I'm actually just following God's will in a deeper way than I ever would have understood. So when I came, I probably would use words about the things I could do or that we could do as a team. I would have used words about impact, and I would have had a sense of time horizon that was like a corporate time horizon. And I think that's just been dramatically expanded. Often what we're doing now is planting seeds that we'll never see the fruit of, even though they might be a very important fruit later. And God's timeline is not our timeline, and how God works is not how I think we should work. And so I think I've grown a lot on that dimension. I think the other thing I think I've maybe grown more in is Kerry says, the church is always going to have problems. It's made of sinful people, and from the Acts of the Apostles, the church had problems. The church is also countercultural. So the church is never going to be accepted from society. And so there's always a tension between those. And I think the thing I've always focused on or continue to focus on is starting from the church's perspective. The church actually often knows what she's doing. It may not be communicated that way, it may not come out, but it's starting first about being rooted in the church rather than using a secular understanding of things to try to impact the church, as much as the church can improve. And so I think that's where I focus in a deeper way. I do think those of us who are at the Pastoral Center of the Archdiocese, we spend probably a portion of every day thinking about sex abuse because we're still paying claims. We spend a portion of every day thinking about what we have to close, given where we are in today's time in the church. We spend a portion of every day thinking about what to do with buildings that used to offer vibrant ministry that are now dilapidated and shutting down. It's actually a very difficult time to be at the church. I have every confidence that we will get through this, and I have every confidence in the hope in Christ in the church. And I, in my head, have a letter that I will one day write to the Archbishop 150 years from now, because I think about him a lot. Or, well, some people would say she. I'm not going there. The Archbishop. And so that's one of the beauties of being at the Archdiocese. You can actually think about the person who's going to be the leader 150 years from now and know that person will be here and know that the work that we're doing now is actually going to help that person 150 years from now or 200 years from now. And that's, I think, one of the beauties of it, too.
These are amazing women, aren't they?
Our thanks to Sally, Kerry, and Betsy for their candid and enlightening remarks. We hope you found them inspiring. Thank you as well for joining us today. I'm Katie Bredemann, and we invite you back again next week for another edition of The Voice of Charity.